I'm really thrilled to be here with Carol Kress today. She is going to be answering questions related to her upcoming class series, Developing Your Connectedness, 6 Feldenkrais lessons to enrich yoga and meditation. Carol, would you like to say anything before we begin with the questions?
Yeah, hello, everybody. Welcome. Really happy that you're here joining, and I'm happy to entertain all your questions about the upcoming series.
Okay, great. I'm going to get started with questions that were submitted in advance, but please do write into the platform you're joining us from and submit your questions, and we'll see them and I'll bring them to Carol. The first question, can you talk about yoga and Feldenkrais, how they support and complement each other and how they are different?
Yoga and Feldenkrais and meditation. Yeah. So the question between yoga and Feldenkrais are they're actually very different systems of study and kind of self-awareness. And with the yoga series we did previously, we kind of focused a bit on different asanas. Feldenkrais was interested in movement, interested in what was possible for our human form, and had studied different asanas and approached them from his perspective. And what we're going to do in this series is have a couple of the lessons that will be related to an asana, that there will be recognizable, for some of you who know yoga, recognizable asana shapes that will kind of dip into and approach with a kind of Feldenkrais sensibility that we'll be developing. But Feldenkrais, basically, we're involved with getting to know ourselves and developing a deeper awareness, a deeper sense of a kinesthetic acuity with how it is we are in the world and move through the world and sense ourselves in the world. And then finding a little bit of, with this combination in this upcoming workshop, we're kind of finding the overlap between meditation and yoga.
And just before we got started, Carol, you said something that I thought was really great, which was sort of redefining the title, which is Developing Your Intraconnectedness.
Right. Yes. So, finding in Feldenkrais, we have this study of enriching our self-image, that through life, many of us get a little bit alienated or divorced from a lot of parts of ourselves, physically and certainly internally as well. So in this class, and basically in Feldenkrais too, in Awareness Through Movement, we want to build and fortify our self-image. Because when our back is really not part of image of ourselves, how we compose ourselves in any action, and certainly in yoga asanas, or maybe not bringing in the fullness of what's possible, of how to organize all the parts of ourselves in an action. So this highlighting in this series will be, going deep, deep inside to develop this more enriched a sense of ourselves, from the inside outward to the outer envelope, and how we organize from the inside through sensation to form ourselves in shapes.
Thank you, Carol. It's really inspiring to hear you talk about it. And even just hearing you refer to the fact that for many of us, our back is not part of our self-image sort of brings that to mind and helps me sort of find myself even now. So
exactly. And for many of us, it'll be, parts like that we don't see, or are not so able to touch intimately, back parts of ourselves. But also if we've had injuries, when we've had injuries, sometimes those parts in the internal representation of ourselves, they're not as complete and rich as they could be. So through various Awareness Through Movement lessons, which by the way, there are thousands of them, and that we can start to access and bring back into play all these parts of ourselves in action. And, over time with awareness through movement, develop a robustness, to how we use our senses and be in the world.
Awesome. We have a specific question from someone who's wondering, they used to do yoga and had a meditation practice, but they haven't done either for several years. They ask, will I be able to keep up with the classes in this series?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One and all can come, because we're all in different phases with this, process of unfolding in life. And in both meditation and in yoga, this idea of knowing ourselves, kind of sensing, our boundaries, our whatever is current limitation at the moment, that is such an important thing. And you're in absolute control of how you enter a Feldenkrais lesson, how big you move, how many times you move, whether you do the movement that's manifested physically or you do the movement in your imagination. So there is such a potent way of beginning to inhabit ourselves and, move as we can into different forms of, the outer self.
Carol, this is a question from me, but you just said about doing the movements in our imagination. And I know that that's sort of a distinction between Feldenkrais and yoga. Can you say something more about that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's really important. In yoga, of course, in a class, when we go to a yoga class, we have a specific asana that we, move right into. And, as I've practiced yoga for many, many years, I have now, of course, imported a lot of the sensibilities and strategies and awareness through movement when I do yoga. So I enter into different asanas, with this, I enhance, my senses and experience so that I find comfort within it without forcing myself, into a certain shape. So I find that when I have that kind of internal presence so active and so, strongly part of how I shape myself in yoga, that I can, avoid a lot of injuries and this kind of adversarial way of forcing myself into something that's not right for me at that moment.
Great. That was really helpful to hear. And it actually relates to this next question we have. Someone wrote in to ask, I have lower back, neck, and leg pain after doing yoga. Will these classes help?
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. Of course, knowing more about yourself, more about these, little sensations of when you've gone too far, when you've exceeded, your capacities at that moment, that is certainly going to help in yoga. And, there'll be times perhaps when some postures in yoga are really not accessible that day for you, that moment. But when we have that kind of more secure knowing of ourselves, we can begin to approach a yoga class with, this way of customizing it to who we are that moment, that day. And that happens absolutely in a Feldenkrais lesson, where it is, we're continually guided to feel where we are and what is right for us at that moment, without judgment, to be able to find a more way to accept who we are at that moment and how to compose ourselves into any kind of action, not just yoga, but any kind of action.
It just occurred to me as you were speaking about it, Carol, that a lot of the things that you're speaking about are actually really easy to experience in a Feldenkrais class, but they're hard to know unless you have done a Feldenkrais class. And we have some classes that you taught previously on the YouTube page. So we'll put a link to those in the Q&A so that people can try those classes with you.
Great. And I want to come back to that question about, low back pain and in a yoga class. And so I think, that's such a broad way of, what there's so many specifics I would love to know about, what it is. Was it a way of pushing oneself beyond one's capacity, beyond our means, because knowing our means is and our capacities is really an important part of doing many athletics as well as yoga. And I think, in the way that we move in awareness through movement, this kind of heightened and directed way of inquiring of where we are at that moment, what we're sensing, and really, digging deeper in and away from just broad strokes, but deeper into, well, what is it that triggers something that's uncomfortable for me? Because finding comfort, many of us, because of our kind of busyness in the world and way we organize in chairs and devices and things like that, we get a little bit removed from where we are in that moment, and if we're in positions that really are injurious to us. So as we start to develop more presence and more of a kinesthetic acuity, these things will start to be illuminated in the moment, and then you have access to contour and change and find options that really work for you for comfort and any kind of functional activity that you desire.
Carol, one thing that I've noticed for myself with an overlap with my meditation practice and Feldenkrais is that there's a kind of learning curve with being honest, like really understanding what's happening and not rejecting the information that I'm getting from myself, that like, if I am uncomfortable, like actually being honest with myself about that. Have you found that you had a learning curve with that as well?
Well, absolutely. And I think, through my years of doing Feldenkrais and then, with the overlay with yoga, with Feldenkrais, this idea of and it's certainly an unfolding and a long, lifelong process for me, for sure, of self-acceptance and non-judgment and, finding what, how I can be present in the moment. And, if something is out of my reach, to accept it and really, tuning into, being here now, and that, in order to win, I got to be present, right? So how to find presence, and it's it's something that comes and goes. It's kind of a fluid relationship, but in an awareness through movement, and I believe in yoga, there's this constant kind of bringing back one's self to this present moment, and then being able to adjust myself in a way and accept what is possible in that moment. But each moment passes, and then it's the next, and it's the next. So how to keep coming back when we're distracted or we have too much of a goal, and then we get disconnected from ourselves. This is my process over and over again, moment by moment.
There's a lot of optimism in it, because knowing that there is another moment, that it creates a lot of space, that there's nothing lost. It's always an opportunity.
Exactly. And it is, that sense of, using, certainly, and we both in meditation and in yoga, using the breath to kind of find our state, as we start to develop more and more access to, ways of describing our state of being at that moment, or we can start to accept the varieties of how we show up each moment, with this, more and more non-judgment, that perfection is not achievable in this moment, that we're looking for improvement again and again and again.
We actually just got a question that I love, which is, I find yoga challenging physically and also mentally as my mind drifts to other things. Will these classes help with that?
Yeah, this is our being human, our mind, the distraction, the kind of going outward. And I think, we get trained a bit by this focus on productivity and in our go, go, go world. So in awareness through movement, certainly for me, over the years, it's provided this way, this pathway to, I get distracted. I'm doing yoga, or I'm doing a lesson, and I'm making a list for what I want to shop or what I'm going to do tomorrow. But, kind of letting that go and just bringing myself back. So in both meditation for me and for yoga, it is constantly bringing myself back. And I would say in yoga that there is this fluid kind of way that we're unifying what we're doing physically along with what we do mentally. And I think that's also present in awareness through movement, where we, can be drifting into some kind of external distraction, but then it's the breath that can bring us back. So we'll certainly spend some time, probably a lot of time actually in the series, focusing on that rhythm of the breathing and using that to bring us to smell each moment.
Great.
And wait a second, I want to say a little more, Juniper, sorry to interrupt, but already I understand that question, and because I certainly know that feeling of like I'm not doing it right, and there's some kind of judgment about the fact that my mind wanders. But that's kind of the nature of our mind, is to be busy with those kinds of things, to kind of, so I want to fortify more and more through this series, this acceptance that this is what the mind does, and how to gently, bring ourselves back to this, this being in the interior.
Great. Thank you so much, Carol.
Mm-hmm.
We have another specific question from someone who asks, I struggle with Chaturanga. Will these classes help with that?
Well, there might be sneaky ways you'll get help, in Chaturanga. I'm not sure what the issues are for you, but, this idea, again, if there is, the struggle already indicates some kind of tension, with accepting what is, what's not available. But we will be working in, a few different shapes, and a lot will be, as it is in yoga, kind of a lot of the primal movements of our torso, our spine, our chest, flexion, extension, twisting, that will help us bring power from the center towards the limbs, in case that's the issue that is troubling you at the moment. Or, it could be, I'm not sure what your issue is, but it could be an acceptance that maybe there's modifications, because even in awareness through movement, there is such a, the foundation of being able to find what works for you at that moment. So modifying, adjusting, and as we talked about earlier, imagining possibilities. Of course, that's not so available in a yoga class, but beginning to open up these options so that we have bigger, better options when we do any action in life.
Great. We have one other question, which is from someone who says, I've never sorry, I've never really been able to meditate. I feel like I do my meditation in Feldenkrais classes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think there's a real flavor of that in awareness through movement. And of course, it kind of has a sister in, walking meditation, where you're moving and you're also working with attention internally, and, and acceptance of, the breath moving continually through us and bringing us back to ourselves each time, and organizing ourselves in an action. So I think there's great overlap in that regard. And, certainly in yoga, we come into poses, and often they're, different styles of yoga, but sometimes we hold a pose for a while. And, so being able to, have that developed internal attention to sweep through ourselves as we're in any pose for a while, or even for a moment, so that we can really bring into a fullness this representation of ourselves, and make adjustments that bring, more ease to the action.
Great. We have a question from someone who wrote in that's somewhat unrelated, but since they wrote it,
That's
read
okay.
it. Yeah, okay. They're wondering if there are any updates on the release of A Life in Movement, the biography of Moshe Feldenkrais.
Yeah, we're diving into volume 2. We're going to work with some fundraising. We've got an editor on board, so it's in process. But don't hold your breath. It'll be coming. Keep the breath moving.
Very good advice. That's great. Well, Carol, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
Well, I would like to say that I know the idea of yoga brings to mind for many people, this idea of flexibility, this idea of strength and power, and also, folded in is, this, contemplative, part of the intention of yoga, of unifying our mental processes along with our physical. It's, maybe in the Western way that some of us maybe approach, or I've seen it in classes, where there is this drive to kind of a perfection of a pose, where I'm wanting, and in my practice that's been very fruitful for me, is to bring together, both in meditation and in the yoga practice, this being able to inhabit ourselves in the kind of this peaceful way of finding ourselves again and again in each moment. I know I'm saying this again and again, but it's this way that the distractions are so great, and we can be habitualized to what's out there, rather than finding home, coming home and making better choices for ourselves. Our brain is kind of organized for, benefit. We're looking for benefit, but we can get habitualized into, habits of seeing ourselves in a less than way, or, a judgmental way that we're not perfect. And, my focus, and it's been, I'm still in process with it through the years of finding that way of being with myself in a calmer way and serene way, and accepting. And I think through meditation, that's often a goal for people, is to find more peace, for sleep, whatever health reasons, and to know more about ourselves. And I think that is another way they dovetail really well, that, in the awareness through movement, this deepening of our self-knowledge so that we can begin to live the lives that we want, instead of being taking on what has come from society or perhaps parents of a way to be in the world and live a life, but to truly start to know ourselves. And I know this is something that many people get from meditation too, is to really know oneself and find that direction home.
I love that, Carol. I love the idea of finding ourselves home. And I heard you say something. I'm going to repeat it back and tell me if this is what you were saying.
Yeah.
That there's a kind of inherent wisdom that comes from an embodied awareness, in awareness through movement, that you mentioned something about making decisions. And I wonder if, I'm actually not sure I heard you about that part right, but I wonder if some of the decision making is actually moving toward what is easier, and finding what's easier is found in a kind of recognition of the present moment.
I think, finding ease, in ourselves, in, I don't know, relationship. It could be relationship to anything, what's required of us physically, or what's required of us from, some expectation that is laid on us externally. But until I feel, for me and myself, I can speak, if I can accept myself and that my choices will be aligned with what is beneficial to me in this moment, either from an expectation that I realize is beyond my capacity physically, or in, some kind of interrelatedness in the external world. I don't know if that's answering, or you can maybe rephrase your question.
Yes, I feel like I was trying to rephrase something that you had said, but I said it in such a complicated way. But the way that you just said it now, I think makes a lot of sense. And I guess like what I'm getting to is this, it's something that I experience in awareness through movement, where I don't always know until I'm really present with myself what's easy for me. Like I could have this idea, like I should be able to do this thing. And then when I get there, I'm like, no, it's not really, like, it doesn't feel easy, even if it felt easy yesterday, or even like half an hour ago. And that there's a kind of choiceless moving toward what's easy in that moment, where it is a choice, but I don't have to like make an effort to make that choice. The choice is sort of known to me by an acceptance.
Yeah, by an acceptance, and I think presence, and really starting to disengage, like the shoulds, that we should, in terms of awareness through movement. Often people who come to awareness through movement in the beginning going, oh, I'm not sure I'm doing it right, or, and that kind of tension that begins to develop and it does take time to kind of, dissolve that kind of expectation from ourselves that we have to be a certain way. And yes, we're changeable. Every day is different, and every moment is different, and we have different capacities that come together in different ways in each second. And how to, be so open to what it is at that moment, without that judgment. I mean, I don't know. For me, this is my study, to be released more and more each day, I hope. And it's not, of course, a straight line from self-judgment, and find that pleasure of, sensation, to really use our senses in this biggest way possible, instead of, having them veiled or closed down in some way, but to really highlight every little sensation, that can help us, guide us towards comfort and what is real for that moment.
Cynthia just wrote in to say that she's replacing her shoulds with clouds.
I like that.
And
Softness, yeah.
And Julie wrote in to ask where it is that you are broadcasting from.
I live in California in the San Francisco Bay Area, and most specifically San Rafael.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I misread that. She's replacing her shoulds with coulds.
I like clouds too.
Clouds works. Yeah, they're both
Clouds
good.
really work.
Sorry about that, Cynthia.
No, it's a beautiful.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Carol. What a pleasure.
Okay, well, we've got some happy clouds coming, so please join us for the next 6-week series, and happy to have you. And if there are more questions, bring them on in, and yeah, happy to have you. Looking forward.